Hello, welcome. My name's Gerald Friedman. I'm professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And I'd like to welcome you all to this exciting conference. Economics has been in a bad way, but it's beginning to get better. As the second half of the 20th century passed, the profession was increasingly dominated by methodological individualists who discounted the role of institutions to argue that social outcomes were the product of unmediated individual choice based on exogenously determined individual psychology, exogenously determined factor endowments, and exogenously determined technology. And the best policy in these circumstances, they argued, is to leave individuals free to interact through unregulated markets without public regulation, public provision, or worst of all, public taxes. By the early years of the 21st century, this neoclassical synthesis had achieved near hegemony among economists and policymakers, driving out competing approaches. Historical economics, going back to the German historical school and the English classical school, institutional economics, going back to American economics, including founders of the American Economic Association, macroeconomics, going back to Keynes and Keynesian approaches. All these were discounted. Not even the spectacular financial meltdowns of the late 20th century could shake this consensus. The savings and loan debacle, long-term capital management, established and run by Nobel Prize-winning economists, the East Asian crisis, the ruble crisis, the high-tech bubble, Enron, water off a duck's back. For a time, it seemed that even the financial crisis of 2007 to 8 and the worst economic collapse since the 1930s could not shake this consensus. Standard response among many of our colleagues was the crisis was somehow due to overregulation and should be resolved by austerity. The Greeks paid the price for this, as did we all. But times change. Suddenly, economics is getting exciting again. REPECT and this conference mark the change in economics and contribute by providing space to incubate a new and better economics. The international roster of sponsoring organizations, the impressive set of speakers I'm so honored to be in the presence, are measures of the constructive ferment in our profession and the desire to move beyond the logic of methodological individualism into a true social science. This is an exciting conference, and I won't detain you unnecessarily. But if I may, I would suggest 10 points for our emerging revolution in economic theory. First, the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. This axiom from Smith is about more than transportation costs. As Smith argued, this is the first chapter of The Wealth of Nations. We are more productive when we work together. The division of labor is the source of productivity gains. Working together, and this is what most of the book, The Wealth of Nations, is about. Most economists, if they touch The Wealth of Nations, they'll only read the first 7 or 10 chapters, the first book. But most of The Wealth of Nations is beyond that. And this is discussing the social context for a successful economy. Economics is necessarily a social science because it is about how people work together to be more productive. Transactions costs are central, not a peripheral issue. They are central because transactions costs limit the extent of the market and the division of labor. Political institutions like money and legal codes, cultural norms of honesty and fair dealing. All of these are fundamental to a successful economy and to understanding the economy because they determine the division of labor and economic efficiency. Second, social facts. Replacing methodological individualism means appreciating the autonomy of institutions, including political and social structures. Social facts prior to the individual, external to the individual. To quote Durkheim, social facts are invested with a coercive power by virtue of which they exercise control over the individual. We need to study social facts as things. 3, history and politics. Within the neoclassical model, economic development has been the product of universal laws with development running equally well forward and backwards in time. Look at the solo growth model. I'm not making this up. Once we recognize the importance of institutions as independent of the wishes of individuals, history becomes central to economic analysis. 4th, rules of thumb and cultural norms. For decades, behavioral economists have been demonstrating the inability of the orthodox neoclassical model to explain behavior and the importance of rules of thumb, because these, maintained by cultural and political conventions, these are institutions with a history and a politics, and it's by the rules of thumb that people make decisions about what to buy, how hard to work, where to invest their money. 5, asymmetric information. Since Arrow and Akerlof, even the most orthodox of economists have given lip service, if no more than lip service, to market inefficiency coming from asymmetric information. Cultural norms and social institutions shape the distribution of information. To understand the role of information asymmetries, economists need to incorporate these into their research agenda. 6, power and distribution. Assuming that gains in efficiency can always compensate losers, at least could compensate losers, the orthodox have focused on efficiency to the complete exclusion of concerns over distribution. Recognizing the role of history and institutions, there's no reason to accept that any such compensation will occur. Maybe it shouldn't, but maybe it should. Distribution is a matter of politics and social choice. Incomplete contracts and the labor process, and monopsony. The orthodox model treats the labor process as equivalent to other commodity exchanges, money given for a defined amount of something, work. Fairness is ensured by competitive markets. Standard practice. This applies to almost no labor exchanges. It's not how the labor market functions. In actual exchange, an unknown quantity of work is given over some period of time. Contracts, labor contracts extend over long periods. Yeah, sure, sometimes it's just 1 for 1, but usually people have careers. They'll work for one place for a long time. They'll be committed to it. Business will be committed to its workers, maybe. Bilateral monopsonies. This gives workers the opportunity to provide less labor than expected by the employer, or the employer to exploit the worker. 8, the economy is about more than the market, and that's why gender matters. There's an entire sphere of economic activity conducted outside markets through command within families, within communities. Without the work done by families in raising children, caring for workers, the human race would literally die out. Little of this exchange is done through the marketplace. Yeah, sometimes you hire a babysitter, sometimes you pay a nanny, but most of it is done within families by some coordination other than markets. Social norms of behavior. Time and uncertainty. Within the model of efficient capital markets, economists have argued financial market regulation must reduce efficiency. After all, if it's perfect, if it's efficient, then any change will make it worse. Recognizing the role of uncertainty, inherent in considering future prospects. I mean, there's uncertainty whenever I do anything, but if I'm doing something about the future, projecting, well, over 30 years, what will be my return on this investment or whatever, then clearly institutions play a vital role. Restraining malfeasance, shaping opinion and judgments about future prospects so the exchanges over time can happen. 10, the commons. Instead of the isolated individual whose actions only affect him or herself, climate catastrophe has exposed to even the most narrow-minded among us the interrelation of all of us in all things. Externalities in the orthodox model have been shunted to the side. Special cases in the orthodox microeconomic models, or worse, dismissed with vague references to Coase's theorem, as if that would apply to most of these circumstances. I could go on there, but social scientists are putting climate change and externalities front and center where they belong. I could go on, as I do in my microeconomics textbook, which you're all welcome to read and elsewhere. But for here, I only want to introduce these topics. Raise the banner for rethinking economics and the revolution in economic theory that's happening now, and it is so exciting. And that is why this conference and its participants are such an exciting events. Their participants are such exciting events. Well, anyway, why this is all so exciting, and I commend you to it. En avant. Friedman out.